Around about 2 years ago, I was in a hotel and took a phone call from Tait from Pioneer. It was just about 2 years ago. And Dan said, "Mark, do you think we should do a documentary on mental and physical health in electronic music?" And it didn't take very long for that discussion to result in a yes. And over the next year, some incredible people contributed to that documentary, including Pete and Ben Pierce, who's managed by Matt. And then a year ago, almost to the day, we showed the documentary to a very small group of people here at IMS. And all of us who were there, and I can see some faces in the audience who were there, we all had all the hairs on our arms stood on end because we knew we were watching something that was going to shift how people perceived health and well-being in electronic music. And to that end, we actually said, let's not show this yet. Let's not go live because we need to answer the questions the documentary poses. And that's when Help Musicians, and Christine is here from Help Musicians UK, came to the fore with their mental health hotline. And so by the time it then subsequently premiered at Amsterdam Dance Event, not only had we got a complete documentary, but displaying all of the issues with great honesty and sincerity, but we also had the answer to the problems, or at least the first answer to the problems. And so what we'd like to do today in this panel is really continue the discussion and broaden it out from being solely about artists, but also about the network that surrounds the artists. But before we go any further, I'd just like the panel to introduce themselves, and if I could start with Christine.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Brown, Director of External Affairs at Help Musicians UK. It's a charity that exists for everyone working in music, from starting out in their careers right through to the end of their careers. And as Mark said, it was in December that we launched the first comprehensive mental health hotline and service for people working in music. Which came off the back of an academic study around mental health and music, which I'm sure I'll talk more about as the panel goes on.
Check. I'm Blaise. My background is kind of varied. I started off as a DJ, progressed to a streaming service guy, and then after that a label owner. And through all that, I kind of saw through different lenses, I think everything that Pete just touched on, which brought me to my current phase in life, which is the co-founder of Remedy State, along with Mr. Ben Turner, which is why I'm here today, talk a little bit about the environment we find ourselves in, and I think for me, more importantly, what we can do about it. You know, the different tools and the information, and you know, a lot of it's free, a lot of it's easy, a lot of it we can carry with us. So I think for me, I just want to share a little bit about that with everyone today.
Hi there, I'm Tait, and I work for Pioneer. I'm editor of DJsounds, and I'm a co-director of Slaves to the Rhythm, Why We DJ.
Hi, I'm Danny Howard. I'm a DJ, producer, I run a record label, and I present a radio show on BBC Radio 1.
Hi, I'm Kelly from Little Empire Music. I work with, I'm a manager. I work with Nicole Modaba, Galantis, Dolly, several other artists.
Hi, I'm Matt Stuart. I've worked in music management for a good few years now, currently at ATC. I manage Ben Pierce, Shadow Child, Theo Cottis, and a bunch of varying other fantastic artists.
Pete Tong, you know what I do. Yeah, apart from being a DJ, behind the scenes, also worked in the industry pretty much my whole life, in record companies and now with WME.
Thanks, Pete. And I'm Mark Lawrence. I head up the Association for Electronic Music. Dan, can I just turn to you first? Where did the idea for the documentary come from?
The documentary came out of a number of things, but at DJsounds, we'd spent the last 10 years creating short-form content, which, when we started 10 years ago, it was quite novel. You know, we were the first people to start taking cameras into the DJ booth. But 10 years later, when everyone was traveling with their own videographers, we felt that our content it wasn't that it wasn't relevant, but I felt that we had an opportunity to do something new. So we decided to create some long-form documentaries. And at the same time as this, off the back of our 20 years of Pioneer documentary, I was starting to question, why do people DJ? It does seem quite a strange, novel thing, apart from the adoration that you get. But to express yourself musically, I wanted to know more. But at the same time, as this was happening, various members of the electronic music community were coming out saying that they had suffered from mental health issues. So people like Nicky Romero, Benga, amongst other people who, and also with my own role of meeting artists all the time, I could always sense like an undercurrent that everything wasn't always quite right. And then coupled that with my own experience where I briefly enjoyed a stint touring around the world. At the time, as I was taking plane after plane after plane, I was thinking, wow, there is a whole other side to this that people just don't see, people just don't talk about. People just don't talk about what it's actually like to be on the road. So it was at this point that Pioneer gave us the opportunity at DJsounds to utilize our prominence within the industry and our access to the artists to try and make a film that made a difference. You know, that wasn't like a fluff piece of asking a DJ, you know, what tracks they've got coming out, how many airports they've been in, but actually to make a film that would just punch through the noise about something new. And because we're not ad-driven, I felt that we could really make a difference with this, because our intentions and our motives were pretty pure.
I'll just ask the audience to put their hands up if they've seen the Pioneer documentary on mental health. If you haven't, I really heartily recommend it, and probably about half the room hasn't, so please take 42 minutes out of your day to watch it when you get a chance. It's on YouTube, right? Okay. Christine, when we premiered the documentary, obviously at the end, we put up the hotline number and Help Musicians UK. What's the reaction been since the hotline launched?
Do you mind if I take it back a bit as to how it came about, and then I can, because it's 6 months in, so it's still fairly new. So the reason why we did it was, obviously we've talked about people, high-profile artists especially, talking about their mental health issues more openly, and we wanted to do more and actually have some evidence rather than the anecdotal evidence that has been there for many years. So we commissioned a study called Can Music Make You Sick? In 2016, which was the first academic study to exist around mental health and music. And from that, it showed that 70% of people were having mental health challenges, so anxiety, depression. That includes DJs, producers, and compared to the general public, that suggests that people in music are 3 times more likely to suffer from a mental health challenge. So, I mean, that really spurred us into action. We asked people what they needed or what they wanted from the industry or from a charity like ours in terms of support, and Music Minds Matter, the helpline and service, was born. So, yeah, the number, it's in the UK at the moment, but the reason why it's important to be here is that the ambition is that this will be a global service. The take-up we had 100 calls in the first month. We've been able to give people free access to therapy, counselling, both face-to-face and telephone counselling. And the reason why I think it's unique is because it's truly comprehensive. So you can call, you can get emotional support, listening, but you can also get financial support from our charity for therapy or whatever may help you on your journey to find, I suppose, some healing through mental health challenges. And the calls are still on the increase. So it shows that there's a clear need, and that's positive for us.
Amazing, thank you. Pete, if I could turn to you first. You made some very sincere personal comments in the Pioneer documentary about the impact on, I think it was probably on your life, about marriages and children and the impact that it's had. Talk to us about how your career has affected your personal life over the years.
Well, it has. That's for sure. You just, yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that happened in my life on that score is I got divorced and then separated from the mother of my children, and then you have to deal with that. And again, there's no real rule book for it. I was lucky at the time that I had some good people around me and gave me some good advice in terms of how to behave and how to look after myself and stuff like that. So on that score, I was really, really lucky. But it's tough, and that's, you know, I had kids. My first child was the year before I joined Radio 1, kind of 2 years into the explosion of the rave scene. And then in the course of the 90s, I had two more kids. So I had 3 kids in the 90s where your feet doesn't really touch the ground. And it was all when it was starting to open up. You know, Radio 1 was a new thing for me. Just going from being a DJ that was quite big in London or the Southeast to being a national DJ, and then by the end of the 90s, or the mid-90s, Ibiza kicking in with Radio 1, and then starting to travel around the world. So all of that on top of trying to raise a family, and then go into the next decade, and it starts to fall apart. So, and then when it falls apart, it takes a long time to get through it. So, I mean, I look back now, and I don't know how I did all the things that I did, to be honest. Maybe I obviously was doing too much. Because, funny enough, when I started DJing, it wasn't considered to be a job. It was a hobby. And I didn't want to be on the radio full-time doing the breakfast show. I just wanted to be a specialist DJ. So I got a day job in the 80s in a record company. And so I was DJing, I had a day job and I had a night job at the weekend. So yeah, clearly it takes its toll.
What do you know now that you wish you knew then? Now that you're 40 years in, are there lessons that you've learned? Is there advice that you would pass down?
A lot of it's common sense. We're looking back on it, so I think it depends what stage of your life a lot of this is happening at. Because a lot of it isn't DJing's fault, I have to say, and a lot of it isn't even being a musician's fault. A lot of it is just dealing with life, and you happen to be a DJ or a musician. Because a lot of the issues that I'm talking about, and when we talk, I'm talking a speech about addiction, that's not because you're a DJ, or that's something that's quite common in musicians and artists. And then you have all that paraphernalia and lifestyle thrown on top of it. That's the kind of deadly concoction. So, but it depends what stage of your life it's happening at. I think, in Avicii's case, everything was so soon, so young, didn't even have a job, didn't really understand the value of money even at the beginning. But when it happens to you a little bit older, like something I was talking about with Eric Murillo a couple of years ago, or Luciano, you act in a different way. Something I didn't cover earlier as well is the weird thing about DJing is I know a lot of people who didn't have kids and chose not to stick with relationships or had broken relationships and then realized that that was always going to be an issue, so let's not make that a priority. But then they get to in their 40s and they're super wealthy, and they're kind of living they appear to be normal on the outside, but they're kind of quite odd because they're kind of like, man boys in a way that they haven't kind of fully grown up. And then that has a whole different set of issues as well. So it's hard to answer in one question, but there's so many layers to it, but we've got to start talking about it more.
Exactly. Danny, if I could come to you, you're kind of I guess if Pete's sort of 40 years in, you're maybe 5 at Radio 1 now, is it?
6 years.
6
this year, yeah.
And it was a pretty quick rise from the dance floor to the decks to Radio 1.
Yeah, it's crazy. Obviously, I listen to Pete every week, and then the next thing I know, I'm on the radio with him, and it's almost like jumping into the TV and you're in the show, and well, I was on the radio. And I went from promoting my own nights, trying to get all my mates down to parties that I was doing in Blackpool in the Northwest. And similar story to Pete, when he was in London, all of a sudden you're getting booked all over the country and all over Europe and even into America, which was crazy. And yeah, when you first do it, it's exciting, and it's something you never experienced, and you want to have a party every night. You want to hang out with the promoter and hang out with people that come and see you play, and sort of be that party boy. And I always had that in me, like I want to be the party boy and the DJ. I need to be the party boy as well. And I soon realised quite quickly. You asked Pete the question of, what did he wish he knew back then to what he knows now. And one thing for me is the effect and the power of just saying no matter how attractive the offer or how going off the party is might be. And I look back at certain situations and I think I've saved myself there just by saying no or sort of drawing a line under it, which I know when you're in the middle of it, it's incredibly hard when your mate's like, do you want another bit? And you're like, yeah, go on, another bit. And I know it's hard, but it's from experiencing firsthand what other DJs are like around me. And another thing I've learned is, I know it's quite obvious to say this, but your body and mind is obviously different to theirs. So whilst they might be able to handle one whole bottle of vodka during their set, I know I definitely can't. So yeah, it's just the power of saying no and the effect that it has positively on you.
To what extent are you now learning lessons from sort of previous generations of DJs? Is there knowledge being handed down now, and are managers playing a role in that as well?
I think so, yeah, but it's just, like I say, you look at someone like Fatboy Slim, he was the party boy, and now he's nearly 10 years sober, but he's still on stage is the party boy. He gives, he looks like he's having a great time, and I guess when you're the DJ, that's important, is as long as you're having a great time, the crowd's having a great time, it's an old saying, but you look at someone like him who's an absolute pro, and it's proven that in your head, you think you have to have, get yourself drunk or do drugs just to be in the scene. He's proof that you don't need to and still be top of your game,
Exactly. Blaise, what took you from label boss to Remedy State?
For me, it was simple. It's about the music, and it was as simple as I wanted to do this for life. I don't consider myself young or old, really. I'll be 30 in August, and I realized that if I'm not careful with the way that I spend the next decade of my life, I could feel 60 by the time that I'm 40. And I firstly just want to thank, people like Luciano, people like Pete, people, everyone who's been, in this game for the last 30 years, because I think that the new generation has learned a lot. If you trace dance music back to the birth of Acid House, in 88, the year I was born, we've learned a lot since then, but we're still learning, and that first wave, that first generation, they're just now getting to the age where those things are starting to catch up to them. So, I think the younger generation, it's exciting to me because we're seeing a new level of consciousness, but, of course we owe that to the people who paved the way for us, the people who learned those lessons the hard way. So for me, it was really just that simple. I have no aspirations to be like a health mogul, like the Remedy State for me is a way to support music. It started off as my own personal journey, again, with realizing like, I want to be able to DJ till I can't walk anymore, and even then, maybe a little bit more after that. And the only way that I'm going to be able to do that is if I take care of myself, take care of my body, take care of my mind, take care of my soul. And once I made that realization, I think something clicked, and it seemed kind of natural that, a lot of my peers and a lot of the people in the industry, maybe they could benefit from a gentle reminder about that too. And that's where Remedy State came from. Again, like we had no, commercial aspirations for this thing beyond just, let's share some valuable lessons that we've learned with the people who make the music industry what it is. So it's all about the music, and I think well-being is an important way to support that.
Thanks, Blaise. Matt, if I could turn to you. Clearly the role of the manager is one of the most important in terms of managing the health of artists and DJs. How do you spot the telltale signs in your DJ or artist that there's a mental or physical health problem? I mean, physical obviously more obvious, but mental health issue. I mean, you manage Ben Pierce, so you've been there.
Yeah, and Ben was a big part of the documentary that Dan made. The interesting thing you asked there is, being a manager, managing the health of your artist. If I'm going to be really brutally honest to you all, when I first started managing, I didn't realise that was part of it. I certainly, and I'm sure a lot of managers didn't if they're being true to themselves, when I just thought it was about getting the right agent, the right gigs, the right publishing deal, the right record deal, and everything else that comes with it, remixes, this, that, keeping the boy busy. When I took over managing Ben in start of 2016, it was going really well, and then it was only when he called me one day and said, we've got to cancel the next 6 months of gigs. And I was like, 6 months? And when Pete was talking about Avicii here and people around him saying, you've got to keep doing it, we can't cancel this. To my detriment, looking back then, I remember thinking, we can't cancel this for a number of reasons. Firstly, because he's got to live. Secondly, I've got to live, because that's my 20% too. So that's a selfish element to that, albeit an important one. And it was only when I went to see Ben and sat with him in his house and saw him, and pardon my French, but he was completely fucked. And I was like, oh God. And then I realized, literally that moment, my role changed as a manager and as a person in the same time. And I realized there and then, and I actually messaged Ben Turner about this, that's probably why I'm on here, is that incident massively, of course, affected Ben very, very publicly, and he came out and he did this very eloquent message on his Facebook, but it really, it can affect the people around him as well, and it hugely affected me to the point of thinking, firstly, I really want to help this guy, because take out the fact that he's an element of how I earn some of my money, he's a really good person, he's a sound guy, he's flesh and blood, and so am I. And I realized then, I've got to do a lot of work as a manager now to understand some of these issues, because I realized I didn't. And then after that, I did a few bits and bobs myself and soul search a little bit, just to try and understand that a bit more, if that makes any sense. And I think hopefully now I have a slightly better understanding of that kind of thing.
Where did you go to get the understanding?
Oof. Well, I'm very open. I've done personal counselling myself before, but it was actually opening up a little bit and talking to some other managers who I'd never normally have this sort of chat with, and realising amongst the manager community and some of the agents, but mainly the managers, because the managers are the closest person to the artist, realising that there's a lot of other managers in the same boat who've experienced very, very similar things and stuff. And that kind of gave me a bit of comfort. But I also realised then that, I probably shouldn't say this, but I realised then that with the fiscal side of the industry, the money side of it, it's just money, and it comes and goes, and it comes again and goes again, and in my case, usually goes. But like, but by understanding that and realising that and focusing on all the things that make someone like Ben, and bear in mind, he's in music because he loves making music and he loves DJing and he's very good at it. Unfortunately, when anxiety and depression kicks in for many reasons, it takes away what he's good at, and it can start causing problems. When we gave him that break, he went away back into the studio on his own terms to make the music that he wanted to make, and came back with some fantastic music, of which I'll thank Pete for playing, because that massively helped Ben get back on track. One thing I will say, I don't want to stay in the microphone too long, is if there's agents and promoters in here, I think this is important to remember. not long after Ben cancelled those 6 months of gigs, first and foremost, he's pissed off 6 months worth of bookings. He's pissed off his agent, or he's pissed off a lot of promoters who've had these events. So after mopping that up, when Ben finally got better, the agent didn't really want to be involved anymore because he couldn't quite rely on him at that point. And then a load of those promoters who did book Ben, but because we had to cancel it, kind of shied away from that as well. And it's like, he didn't, and DJs in general, they don't cancel gigs for the most part. I mean, now and again you get the odd dickhead and we've all had a few too many beers and can't make the flight, whatever, that happens. But when someone's been really bad and had to cancel half a year's worth of income because they're that bad, to give them a bit of a break, and maybe think about why they've done that.
Yeah, it's a big message, very big message. Kelly, if I could turn to you last. Nicole is a machine. I mean, she's sort of relentlessly gigging. How do you kind of manage an artist that won't stop? How do you make sure they take space?
Well, I think you have just got to be firm about it, because I feel like it is my responsibility to make sure that as well as her being successful, she needs to be healthy, because you can't actually be successful if you're not healthy, and not in the end. And as much as artists feel like they should be working every weekend, haven't worked with any artist that hasn't really listened when you've said, look, this is too much. You were nearly crying when you called me last week, or, you can tell when people really need a break, and artists need to listen, and they do normally, in my experience.
And I guess a question to both of you, but how much support and advice do you get professionally as managers on issues of mental health and telltale signs to look for, or have you had to do it yourself and learn the hard way?
Well, from my point of view, it was actually meeting Christine and people like that along the way, and realising there were these things that were open up and developing. And also, like you said, just speaking to people in my office and other managers, and we now do a weekly, like a chat about how we are, as opposed to how your artist's doing and what's happened, what's the release girl doing. I don't know, like, how the hell are you? How are you feeling? It's very much everyone tries to look after each other a little bit more. It's just, that's how we do it.
I think I was quite lucky, because when I was in PR before I went into management, but my first management job was for a company called DEF in London, and I worked with Moby for many years, and it was a great company, and it was very focused on, I mean, that was like over 10 years ago, but even then, very focused on sort of taking care of the artists, and I had that early education, and I think a lot of young managers don't have that, because they might be doing it on their own, they don't have that support network around them, and I think it's very much, it comes from experience, seeing artists touring day in, day out, seeing how it affects them, and young artists don't always have that. But I do think it's getting much better, and I think just the fact that we're all talking about it, it's great.
I just thought one of the other observation to make is that, I mean, a lot of this journey through the history of dance music, even before house and techno, but certainly over the last 20 years, is we've had a lot of firsts. In the 90s, when DJs really, really blew up, like, I remember my advances when I was doing the Ministry of Sound albums with Boy George. I don't know, you get 50, 100 grand or something. It was pretty serious money, and it enabled you to kind of slow down a bit. If you had a big hit, see Jason there, we're going to do a thing on Positiva this week. If you make a hot track, you might get 100 grand, or and again, you could kind of slow down a little bit. But I remember when the labels started closing down at the end of the 90s in the UK, and the majors started reeling back on investment in dance music, and the bubble kind of burst. Then, as the internet kind of took off, everyone started traveling and like pedaling twice as hard to stay at the same place. And I think there was a mentality in the 2000s where we all felt that well, A, we would be invited to all these exotic places for the first time, and there was a thing in the back of your head that was like, this might not be here in a couple of months. So that thing of, you almost get addicted to the cycle. And there is a fiscal need, because it's funny with DJing, you know, that's where it is like being a stage actor, because you don't earn money when you're asleep, you have to go and get the money. So if you think the money's going to stop, you know, you kind of get addicted. It's like the mouse on a wheel. You kind of get addicted to keep taking the cheese, and the ego plays a part of it as well. Ego is a big part of this, which is like, you know, I want to stay up there, so I've got to keep going. And that was a massive part of it for Eric, and for Sasha, and you just get into this relentless cycle, and you don't come up for air for years.
So I guess you lose perspective.
Yeah, and then for a long time in the 2000s, no record companies were paying you that kind of money to allow you to just, like, there was no other income. I mean, thankfully now, with the resurgence in the record business and money starting to flow again with streaming, I know certainly from the label I'm involved with, you know, the advances are going up again. And maybe we'll see a cycle where a few more of the DJs can start earning money from music and breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that's the other biggest difference, that if you're in a band, you know, your cycle, well, you certainly used to be, is, you know, you make your album, you live off the money from the advance of the album or the royalties that you earned before, and then you go out and tour the album. But DJing is never like that. It was 52 weeks a year.
Yeah, interesting.
I just wanted to pick up on the conversation around managers, and it was a topic that came up at Remedy State and the role of the manager. There is actually a fantastic resource that maybe isn't well known by the Music Managers Forum, and it's the Manager's Guide to Mental Health. It's almost like a toolkit. So if there are any managers here, it's worth looking that up, just so that you can recognize signs, and hopefully there'll be some practical tips on how to manage the mental health of your artist.
Thanks, Christine. Danny, do you think that we need to start changing the perceptions and mindsets within managers and DJs, that a gap in the diary isn't a bad thing?
I was going to jump in actually and say, my manager Sophie, she's very good at saying, here's the offers that you've got, maybe leave that one. Nothing against the offer, it's just, you know, as a DJ now, I know myself, but most DJs who are sort of out there at the moment, they're not only DJing, they have to be in the studio making music, they run record labels. Running a record label, usually, successfully, is a full-time job in itself. So for a DJ to be involved in that as well is extra pressure. You have to be across social media. That's a big part. That's a key tool for how most DJs promote their own music and you know, themselves as what they do in the club. You know, press, interviews, it all adds up. And Blaise mentioned before that it's all about the music, and I know me personally as a DJ, you know, I want to be just in front of crowds playing music or on the radio playing music, and when you've got all these other things to think about, it does sort of bog you down a little bit if you feel like you're slipping behind. So a manager's really important in that respect, because you can lean on them, and you know, they're there to not only amplify what you do, but also to take the weight off a little bit, so you can concentrate on what's important. And that's why it's important to have one if you've got all these, you know, responsibilities, not just as a DJ, but as all, you know, all of the above that I just mentioned.
Go Blaise.
I think while we're on this little tangent right here, I wanted to add something real quick. Something that came up last night in the conversation that Christine just mentioned, where we were talking about management and how they sort of manage the push-pull, right? You know, the artist wants to build a new house and says, you know, put me on the road for 6 months, right? So in a lot of cases, it's not the manager pushing the artist, it's the artist pulling the manager, right? And, you know, like Ben said last night, who's going to win at the end of the day in that conversation? Always the artist, right? Because the manager works for them. I think one thing that we can do as an industry is, it sounds simple, but I mean, give artists a break, right? I mean, in the most literal sense. I mean, and I'm going to share a cool example that happened to us last night. Could not have been more serendipitous. I haven't even told Ben this yet. So Ben, if you're out there, this is the thing I was going to tell you this morning. At the end of the night last night at Remedy State, after we had an incredibly intense panel discussion, I mean, when I say intense, there were tears. There were tears on the panel, and it was beautiful. And directly after that, myself and my film crew, who's around here somewhere, you know, we're producing a piece, a short film on the retreat, and I get a text message from one of the artists who was meant to come, and he says, you know, my flight's been canceled, her flight's been delayed 4 hours, you know, can we please push back the interview? And of course, for me, it's a no-brainer. You know, we just came off that panel. What else am I going to say? I said, of course. You know, he says she hasn't slept in 43 hours. She's coming straight in. She has a show tomorrow. She has a panel. Can we please give her a break? And for our film crew, that wasn't a really important part of the piece. That was an integral scene in the video. And what we decided to do at the last minute was use this opportunity as a way to sort of lead by example. So you'll see when the piece comes out, but what we're going to do is we're going to actually use that piece to highlight the fact that we didn't do that interview with her, right? So we're going to say this is the point where we were supposed to do the interview with the artist, but she hadn't slept in 43 hours and her flight was late, so we gave her a break, and we're going to do the interview some future time. And I think that's what the industry can do, is just examples like that. And I think if we start doing that as an industry, maybe artists won't feel so much pressure to just constantly be going and going.
Absolutely. And Dan, coming to you as well, actually, from the experience of making the documentary, what do you think could be introduced that would make a difference?
Come on, Dan.
I mean, how do we give people a stop button? Do you think it's doable?
I just think that everyone needs to take responsibility. You know, whether it's, you know, friends and family, whether it's management. Where, I mean, you know, someone asked me.
And the artists themselves, may I say, sometimes.
Definitely, yeah.
Like the artists themselves taking responsibility. They don't always have to say yes to everything, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we need to build a culture where people can say no. And I think that when people can speak out about these issues and discuss them without prejudice, and I think also, as well, it's so difficult because there have been so many things that have been highlighted here today about always having to be on and the revenue stream of performing versus record sales. But I think, you know, I think maybe it could just be used to artists, used to maybe like an album tour cycle where you do actually go offline. You know, there shouldn't be this feeling that you should be like a radio station just constantly broadcasting information or music about yourselves. And, you know, maybe build a culture where people can respect that you're having some private time, that you're having some downtime, so that actually when you do come back, you can make more of a noise, you can reinvent yourself. And it's quite funny, we did a tour of a couple of the clubs yesterday, just during the day. And one of the things that I noticed was obviously the clubs in Ibiza, they have an opportunity over the winter to completely reinvent themselves. And I think as DJs, no one really does that. It is 52 weeks a year, so I think being able to take time out would be great. Just have to find a way to make some money in the meantime.
Christine, what do you... Go on. No, Pete.
No, I think the other thing is, which isn't spoken about that much, and it's a particular thing, because Ibiza's like a microcosm of like, you can, so much happens in a season here, it's like other people's whole lives. So what people deal with in Ibiza when they're residents is everything's magnified. And I think, you know, I spoke to Luciano this morning, just told him what I was doing today, and if there was anything that he would like to say if he was on this panel. And we talked about the kind of re-education of the mindset of like understanding that it's not always a party, and that it's okay to DJ. You don't have to stop drinking forever or whatever, but actually try DJing without the rider. You know, try DJing and actually don't drink, and then work out why you're there. And work out whether it was actually better or not. I stopped drinking for over a year recently, and it's quite funny at first, when it's particularly in Ibiza, like you go to Mambo or something, it's like, shots, vodka. I'm not drinking today. Like, and they look at you, it's like, what? You've been drinking, going mad here for 20 years. It's like, not today. It's like, it's fine. And it's interesting to get people's reactions. With total respect to Mambo, they took the drinks away and they were absolutely brilliant. But I think there is a kind of re-education because we have, and I've been part of it, you know, we have put this image out of hedonism. And hedonism is good because we're selling a good time. You know, you do feel locked into being part of it. And maybe, and I started to talk to some of the people up at Remedy State last night, this is probably the next wave of consciousness of the next 10 years. Because I know from my kids who have been through all that as me, as their dad, that they've got a bit of a different attitude about it. It's not necessarily for the younger generation, and maybe we should have had someone that's 18 up on the panel today, that they, you know, maybe there is it would be great to think there's a mindset that they can go out to DC10, have an absolutely brilliant, amazing time, get squashed, and be sober. So I think, you know, we need to talk a little bit more about that as well, and I think that's been happening in Ibiza more and more. You know, Eric's come back and successfully done it. Fatboy Slim played for 5 hours the other night, all night at Pasha, totally sober, and he's been doing it for 10 years. Moby, you should look at some of his stuff online. I mean, he's fucking guy's hilarious. He's an absolute genius writer. You should all read Porcelain because it is the best book I've ever read about what it's like to be a DJ in New York as well in the 80s, which was, if you think now, you know, 50 million times worse, you know, except they didn't do the traveling as much. But the sins that went on in New York City. He says in his podcast, he said if you weren't drunk or taking drugs in New York, you were missing out on what New York was all about. So, but I think it's just people getting used to doing it without being messed up and actually realizing, you know, because some people then realize that actually they don't like it and they might not want to do that. And other people realize it's like a light going on above their head going, oh my God, I'm actually quite good sober. I'm actually better. I'm actually getting paid to do this. People are paying me a fortune, and actually, it's quite good to do this sober. Black Coffee doesn't drink. You know, the guy's exploded and came out of the, you know, although he was a big star in South Africa, he kind of came through this island through the most hedonistic place there is here, and he managed to do it without drinking, so you can be done.
And he can remember what records he played every set.
He can remember what records he played, and he doesn't repeat himself every set. Well, maybe he does, but that's another thing.
Christine, from looking across other parts of the music industry, do you think electronic music is missing some tricks? Are there practices or things that we should do that we're not?
I think generally, I think education is a really big part of this, and I don't just mean. I mean, I think there are particular pressures within electronic music that need to be addressed. But I think education in general is a big part of this, and I mean from educational institutions teaching mental health health when people are kids, right through to the education of this is where you go to. I mean, almost like a toolkit for DJs. This is what you should look out for. This is what you need to recognize. These are the signs. These are the signs in other people. But also people being educated on where they can go if they need support. So, for example, there's a lot to do around raising the profile of this service that we have. But when you look wider than that, and the duty of care is a massive question. We've talked about the responsibility of the manager, this responsibility of the individual, and actually in terms of the individual, we need to educate people on how to look after themselves. So not even just how to be in music or how to be a DJ and look after yourself. You know, we talked about Remedy State, meditation, the importance of breathing, nutrition, the importance of getting into a routine, seeing yourself as a business and not, don't just keep going. So, well, I think there's loads of things. It's complex, but it's about enabling the individual themselves to help themselves and also to go to get help if they need it.
Thanks. And just one question for Kelly and Matt, actually. Do you think we've got to a stage between managers, agents and artists where like a voluntary duty of care or code of conduct should be established, just so that we set some standards that say, if you see this, do this, or agree with an artist that, you know, if I see these signs, please pull me away from the darkness. You know, should we be more formal about it, or is everything okay?
It's a really tough one because everyone's different, and it's hard to assess everybody in the same way in terms of when there might be a problem or when somebody needs to stop. But I think it would probably help, because I think there are a lot of managers or other professionals, music industry professionals out there that actually probably aren't equipped to know when it's a real issue, and not equipped, you know, and I just don't know how, it might be difficult to establish what those guidelines are, but I think it could definitely help.
I think if you're younger, then the relentless schedule is challenge enough, and then it's just pretty straightforward. You definitely need to have a break to look after yourself and do all the things that you were talking about. I think if you have family, then, but back to the first question you asked me, then you definitely have to make time, you know, if you want that situation to survive. And otherwise, you as an agent or manager are going to end up, you're just putting off a problem that is going to come rear its head down the line, because your artist is going to have a mental breakdown when, you know, he's kicked out of his house or he's separated from his kids. So I think, you know, when that situation is going, it's just clear that you just can't have them working, you know, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you know, 4 or 5 weeks a month, 12 months a year. You're going to have to put in the breaks. So.
Yeah, that's something that I do, we do across our artists is making sure that, well, first and foremost, it comes from what the artist wants and asking them how much time they do want off. And then being very open with the agent and hoping the agent understands, which they should if they're a good agent, and making sure that he only wants to work maybe 2 weekends a month, and that's it. And if that, because them other 2 weeks, he can get in the studio and play his golf and do whatever he wants to make him be good at DJing the next time he plays.
Usually common sense prevails, because if you do have a relationship you care about, or you do have your first child, it's brilliant. It puts the brakes on. It's when they don't. Yeah. Like I said earlier, like they get to a certain age, and you know, and they don't, and that artist doesn't have those kind of anchors that you probably start to see the warning signs.
I mean, on reflection, we're a multi-million-dollar industry that's truly global, almost entirely staffed by small companies without HR departments. Yeah, whereas in any other industry, anyone that had a problem would have a room where they went to with a trained expert to respond to anything, and a document in their hand, which was an employment contract, which had all the rules and regulations, and they would have a staff handbook that said, if this happens, you can do that. If you feel like this, you can go there. You can have this many days off. You can have sick leave. None of it exists.
I mean, one of the things that crossed my mind before I had to speak this morning was that if you had a child and they had been affected by drug use in club culture, if you'd lost a child, that you might feel a bit weird about what we're talking about right now. But because they would say to us, well, you've been selling this thing. Yeah. It was like, this was going to happen to you eventually as well. And I think one of the things I learned from Radio 1, what happened in the 90s, and learned from people like Christine professionals coming into Radio 1, when as a public service station, it's like, what are we going to do about this? And it was basically that. It wasn't, you're not going to go on the radio and say, kids don't take drugs. You're going to go on the radio and say, if you take drugs, this could happen. And if you take certain types of drugs, these drugs aren't very good. And so it was just getting the conversation out there and just getting the awareness out there and encouraging, education, as you said. And I don't want to keep going on about drugs and drink, because it is, mental health is really what we're here for, but it comes back to that of talking about it.
It's in the mix.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on I think, an opportunity, which is, you've talked about the music organisations. We don't have a structure. There's no HR structure, for example. So there's an opportunity. The talking's really important. This is really important. But I think for us as an independent charity, we want to get all those organisations together. So at least we're together from each different side of the industry, talking about the same thing, but talking about action and what's next. And so getting together a group to take responsibility first of all, but then maybe look at what a code of best practice might be. I think that could be a starting point.
Well, I'll definitely make a commitment on behalf of AFEM to get the artist ambassadors together to begin the process of the fellowship, or the council to work out what those standards should be, and absolutely commit to bring those organisations together, because I think it's critical that we finish a discussion like this with a commitment, and that's certainly the commitment I'm going to make. I think as well, another commitment that should absolutely be made, which harks back right to one of the first points, was if you're an agent or a promoter or a booker, give people space. And if you're an artist, if you're a manager, allow yourself space. And I just think those are the two resounding outputs from this discussion. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for talking. Bang on time.